First of all, welcome. It's nice to see all of you. I'm not going to give you the very beautiful story about empathy today in a modern world, how volunteering in the Red Cross is the answer to anything. I'm not going to provide you with answers because I think there's more questions to be asked than I have answers to. Let me get back to that later. First of all, let's start with just a brief an introduction exercise. I can see that many of you know each other, but if you sit next to someone you don't know, or maybe in the back, then turn around to find someone you don't know that well. And then I would like to have you ask each other 2 questions. Pick one of them. What's the most challenging choice you've ever made? Or what was your first kiss like? Just a minute. All right, thank you very much. I know you could probably talk about this for hours, and maybe you can continue on afterwards. I don't think the microphone is that loud, but anyway, thank you very much. It was quite funny to see all of the smiles and interesting dialogues that was going on very quickly. So thank you very much for that. I'm going to talk about empathy in a crisis of today, in the crisis of humanitarian principles being sort of challenged in a way, and to an extent we don't even can conceive in a beautiful venue just like that, just like the one we are in right now. So just to start off with getting a sense of what empathy also can be and can feel like, I just wanted you to get to know each other just differently than what you might get to when you speak over coffee. So please continue with that talk afterwards. That's always very interesting, asking new questions. I'm going to talk about empathy as a driver for political and social action. Just as I mentioned before, maybe a bit sort of dystopic in a way, but I'm not going to sort of present you with empathy as the key to everything in this world, where we are seeing crises we don't act upon, where we see people dying, trying to get to Europe, etc. I'm going to talk about empathy as a driver for modern action, as a driver for action we haven't seen before, and maybe ask questions about how we, both as a Red Cross Society, you as probably entrepreneurs, interested people in empathy or humanitarian questions, or just as citizens, how we can address these empathic actions that we see right now here in Copenhagen, but also in bigger parts of Denmark, Germany, etc. So I'm going to talk about empathy in 3 parts, as a resource, as a potential game changer in politics, I would say, but let's get back to that in the discussion. And also, as I mentioned before, as a new question on how to address humanitarian action with new frameworks for engaging. Just briefly about the Danish Red Cross Youth. We are a quite small and quite big organization at the same time, at least here in Denmark. We are around 5,000 volunteers, meeting 12,000 beneficiaries, that's vulnerable children and youth here in Denmark. But we also have programs throughout the world, in Jordan, Palestine, Greenland and Uganda actually. We've been working in Uganda, in Denmark for 50 years, and we have a lot of experience with engaging and mobilizing young people. We are working with a peer-to-peer approach. We are working volunteer-based. We believe that volunteering is central in a modern democracy, just like ours. We believe that volunteerism can build new relations that we haven't seen before. And we believe also that volunteering is a key in changing both the political agenda, changing societies, and also changing individuals' lives. And we've seen that for many years. And I would love to, just like I was mentioning in the introduction, I would love to tell you, to give a talk about how volunteerism is changing the lives of vulnerable children and youth, how volunteerism is changing the lives for volunteers, and how volunteerism actually can change the society. And I would still love to give that talk someday. When Mikkel asked me to come and make this presentation a month ago or something like that, I said yes, and I thought it would be a really easy ride. I would just come and tell you that no matter what the question on empathy was, volunteerism, and especially the Danish Red Cross Youth, was the answer. And I would tell you that we have a lot of experience and that we could really capture this energy that's going on with the refugee crisis right now here in Denmark. I'll get back to it, but then this Rødby situation happened, where we saw around 1,000 Danish citizens driving to Rødby with food, clothes, toys, etc., providing necessities for refugees, even offering them a ride to Sweden. You all know that story probably. Well, that was sort of a game changer, at least for me, because it sort of made me think or reflect on that we don't have the answers in the traditional humanitarian organizations. We don't know how to capture or to address, to provide a framework for that empathy, that drive for action that people felt 14 days ago. And we failed completely in raising this awareness 5 years ago, when the conflict really was sort of developing in Syria and the Middle East as such. So that's not really a success that we have around 1,000 people driving to Rødby. Of course, it's beautiful. I'll get back to that and why it's a dilemma. But it also made me at least reflect on why we are not able to provide an agile and dynamic framework for engaging in everyday questions here in Denmark. So volunteerism is the answer no matter what the question is, but maybe we have to address this humanitarian crisis differently. This is a picture of a mother and her two small daughters sitting at a road at Lolland, which is the southern part of Denmark. I don't know much about empathy as a concept. I'm not a psychologist or anything. I know something about mobilizing empathy, engaging people in empathic actions. But in my sort of wish to describe this, I could only show this picture because I guess all of us feel empathy when looking at it. All of us can relate to a mother sitting there with two children being cold and looking very tired. All of us can relate to not being able as a parent to be able to nurture your child in a way that you can provide a safe bed to sleep in. And that's what empathy is. Empathy is the ability to step into someone else's shoes, sort of in a broad definition. And that definition, I believe, is both very beautiful and very concrete. We could describe empathy as a concept in many different ways. We could make it very theoretical, but maybe just looking at a picture, imagining what those shoes must feel like for the little girl wearing shoes, or maybe the little girl next to her, which you can't see her really, but not wearing shoes, having dirty socks, or maybe the mother sitting with her two children. Of course you want to react seeing such a picture. And she's sitting on not a high road, but a road in Denmark. Of course you want to act. Of course you want to nurture, to provide them shoes, etc. Of course you want to do that. And you are able to step into their shoes, maybe just for a brief moment. I can't really imagine what she's been going through. But when she's sitting in Denmark, of course I can relate. But I don't think that anyone in here, at least not myself, can relate to what she came from. I don't think any of us in here can imagine what it must be like to be a refugee in Syria or in Jordan, where the World Food Program recently cut the supply. So people are actually suffering in the refugee camps in Jordan right now. I don't think we can imagine that. We can try, at least to an extent where we look at pictures, we know statistics, we read. Reading literature is really creating empathy as well, because it makes you able to just for a tiny little moment step into the world of a mother who now is in Denmark, but maybe a month or two ago was in Syria or Lebanon or Jordan. Taking that as the empathy concept, I would like to go on to sort of a more fruitful approach, maybe, talking about empathy as a resource. Empathy is the new black in Danish politics at the moment. I'll get back to it, but we actually have a quite new party which states that empathy is one of the crucial values that they are taking their starting point from. What we do in the Danish Red Cross Youth is working with empathy as a resource. This is a picture of two gentlemen. One is the mentor, that's the older man, and one is the mentee. This is what we do really. We build relations, we create relations where there weren't any beforehand. We sort of engage young people. I know he's not that young, but anyway, we engage young people in new relations, in new communities that create social action and also social engagements in new forms. So we've been living off that for 25 to up to 50 years. We've been working with all sorts of different concepts, from summer camps to mentoring to study support in prisons, working with young homeless here in Copenhagen, etc. We know what empathy is when it's a resource. Then it's beautiful and it's simple, and it's also creating a lot of social impact, to an extent where it both changes the lives of these people, but also the society they work in, because it makes your society more coherent when we know each other, and especially when we know each other and can relate to each other, even though we don't have the same backgrounds. And actually that's the next point, that's empathy as a resource in understanding complexity. I've just heard about it in preparing for this speech. I heard about this wonderful initiative, which is 10 years old, I think, called Hello Peace, where an Israeli, no, it was a Palestinian guy, putting phone booths up on both sides, on the Israeli border and the Palestinian. And then you can go, whoever you are, to pick up a phone from the Israeli border, and then it would call a phone somewhere in Palestine. And then someone could pick up, a complete stranger, and you can talk for 30 minutes for free. The only thing you know is that you don't know whoever you're talking to. It was called Hello Peace because it doesn't really overcome the fact that it's a long and very complex conflict that's going on down there. It doesn't really cover that a lot of people have lost their relatives or their loved ones, but it gives sort of a framework in understanding each other like human beings and not as representatives for a conflict that's so complex you can't even begin to imagine what the solution is. And maybe that's an interesting point in talking about this humanitarian crisis today. Empathy as a key in understanding complexity. Empathy as a key with you as a Palestinian who might have lost a sister, a brother, or a mother, or a dad, calling and talking to an Israeli citizen who might have lost just the same, talking about the weather, how beautiful the sun shines on both sides, talking about love or loss or something in between. Just builds relations you can't even sort of put a price on in a conflict like that. And it doesn't necessarily make a Palestinian change his perspective on the conflict, but maybe just gives or provides a different approach in how it must feel to be on the other side of the border. And of course that's huge, and we don't see the same kind of conflicts here in Denmark, but just looking at you all look very resourceful. You all look like you have base in Copenhagen and that you are very happy to work with whatever you do, and that you maybe have long educations. I'm just guessing, but something tells me that. you don't necessarily know how it feels to be located in Lolland, not having a job, not having any idea on how to get a job, because the jobs are closing and you see more refugees coming, and you're really scared that they might break in at night, or that your child, which is in childcare, might be suffering from putting an asylum center up at the other side of the road. You don't know how that feels. So just in the Danish context, we see these groups not knowing each other at the same level, not to the same extent. I don't want to compare Denmark with the conflict in Israel and Palestine. But my point today is that empathy is the key, or using empathy as a resource in understanding complexity in modern society dilemmas is quite a new approach, which is interesting in politics, but it's also very interesting for us as a humanitarian and social organizations. There's a huge potential in that. And that's the next part. That's empathy as driver of social and political change. When you get to know someone who lives in Lolland, who has a complete different starting point than you might not vote differently next time there's an election. I don't know, probably you wouldn't. But you would have a more fruitful approach to discussing social questions, would be my guess. You would also feel yourself more driven towards taking actions on the fact that we don't have any jobs at Lolland. Maybe, just maybe. And when you look at the picture of the mom with her two daughters, as we saw before, you feel a need to act, right? I sort of sensed it in the room. All of us feel desperate in sort of our wish to take care of her and her children, and we all feel desperate in facing a conflict that we don't know how to address or how to solve in Syria. So feeling empathy can be a huge driver of social and political change, and making a better link between writing, formulating, discussing politics, and actually acting as civil citizens in the civil society is sort of an interesting dynamic that's not been explored fully, at least in my opinion, yet. That's why Alternative is quite interesting. I'm not saying anything about their politics. I'm not saying that they're good or bad or anything, but it is interesting that they're working with empathy, which relates to much more than just legislation. They don't discuss the size of the state only, they discuss the community as a whole. They discuss coherence, they discuss values, to an extent where all the other parties think they're silly. But I think they have something to it, combining civil society actions with discussions and political perspectives on legislation. That's a quite interesting link. And I think the first organization, party, movement that capture this link more and to its full potential will really sort of make a huge difference in our society as a whole today. That's my thesis, at least. And I hope that Danish Red Cross Youth can really push an agenda here, but the old organizations, the old institutions doesn't know how to address that. The police down in Rødby didn't know what to do with 1,000 citizens coming with toys and diapers and food, etc. They didn't really know how to do that sort of proper in a way that it actually made an impact. And then it's back to the empathy, not only as a huge resource, but also as a dilemma, at least to the modern institutions or older organizations, just like the Red Cross. This is a picture from Hovedbanegården, the central station of Copenhagen. And as you might can see, there's a huge line of people standing with food and a sign saying, "Refugees welcome, the food is for you. Denmark loves you," or "Denmark hearts you," etc. I was actually with a train full of refugees recently, and I, as a good, decent citizen, as a Red Cross volunteer, really thought that maybe we could sort of mobilize something. Maybe they were hungry or anything, and I wasn't able to speak with the ones I was sitting with because they spoke Arabic and I didn't, so it was sort of hard. But it was just so funny that it was an older father who offered me biscuits which he was offered at the German border, and they were not interested in food, they were not interested in attention or anything, they just wanted to cross over and get the train to Malmö as fast and as soon as possible. They were not hungry, they felt safe. In Denmark, they knew that they had to get to Sweden as soon as they possibly could, and they didn't really want all that. So I didn't want to sort of show you a picture of volunteers standing around this huge pile of food and clothes, because that sort of tells us that volunteering in this way is bad, and it's not like that. These people are feeling empathy, these people want to make a difference. But maybe, and just maybe, we as a Red Cross, we as Denmark, we as a civil society doesn't have the right framework to put this into real action. That's a huge dilemma. Imagine what we could have done with the resources of 1,000 people engaging for 10-15 hours. That would be amazing to transform this into action that could send more resources to Jordan, for instance. But that's not what you want to do as a citizen. You see a need and you want to act directly to that need. You want to address the question of the mother sitting with 2 children. You don't want to imagine a refugee, or you can't imagine how it feels like to be stuck in Jordan, not having enough food, not being able to flee to Europe. We can't imagine that, so we address what we can imagine. That these children must be hungry, that they must miss a good pair of shoes, or that they must miss a toy. And that's a very sort of Western approach to what these children need. They're perfectly fine sitting in that train. They have clothes, they have security, and most of them have more food and drinks than they could consume on a train ride. So we need to sort of put this engagement, this feeling of empathy, into a framework where it addresses the real questions, or where the need is biggest. That's my thesis at least. And the dilemma is that, like I wrote on the slide, that unorganized actions doesn't necessarily make social impact. And that's a huge dilemma, because you didn't want to sort of reject these people from doing that. You just want them to do something better. And the better is, in my perspective, is very old-fashioned. That's collecting money for Jordan, for instance. So how do we transform this empathy, this sense of I must act, and I must act now? I must act on these children, these people I see right here on Danish ground. How can we transform this into a more global-oriented citizenship? How can we do that, not as a Red Cross, because I don't think we can do it alone, but as a civil society here in Denmark? This is what I call an empathic gesture, and that's maybe a bit provoking to many of you. This is a huge demonstration at Christiansborg in front of the Danish Parliament, just a few days after we saw these refugees coming by train or by foot to Denmark. It was under the flag of Refugees Welcome, and of course it's a good empathic gesture to stand with people who look just like you, trying to welcome refugees that may or may not be here at the moment. Of course that's good, but how can we imagine if we could transform all of this action, all of this empathy, all of this need for taking responsibility, need for taking action into something really making an impact? Imagine if we could provide a framework for linking politics, for linking action in the civil society better. Imagine if we can create a movement of empathy. Imagine if we could make a humanitarian revolution starting from feeling empathic, starting from feeling that there's something wrong with the way we welcome refugees here in Denmark, but really makes an impact in more than just demonstrating. That sort of asks the questions on who should or who is able to do that. The civil society organizations, at least the old ones, are not able to do it today. And that frightens me a bit to say here, especially because there's camera, etc. But the Danish Red Cross Youth are not able to address this. Nor is the Red Cross as a big society. They're not able to address this need for action. The Danish government is completely unable to do it. So I think it's about creating new sort of organizations, new frameworks for movements, taking action, really making an impact, but doing it in a more dynamic, more agile way than we know today. Transforming the need for putting shoes on a refugee in Denmark into an action of taking responsibility for the child sitting in Jordan suffering. Time's running. So if empathy is a driver for political change, I think, or my thesis would be that it needs a framework for a movement and not an organization. We're not able to address this need. Empathy as a concept in the modern world, empathy as a resource can change, in my opinion, or my thesis is that it can change political dynamics. It raises questions on voting liberal or voting left-winged, but not taking action in your daily life as a citizen. That's not cool anymore. We need a framework that is able to link politics and action as a citizen better. And that really shifts the focus, as I state, at least, from just legislation. How many refugees should we welcome to Denmark, to more broader civil society action? How do we actually welcome them in a way that they feel part of a community, fully and really? And how do we engage people in the questions of what happens in Amman actually relates completely and fully to what happens in Albertslund a few months later. That's my thesis, that the strong focus on legislation is being replaced by a broader political agenda, asking questions on how do we take action in new forms. Yeah, and that's sort of related to the last point about unorganized actions. They really ask for new ways of volunteering, new frameworks, and maybe new sort of, not organizations, but something in between. Alternative says, what's it called in English? Third sector organizations, which combines something from the public sector, something from the private, and something from the civil society. And I don't think that's the solution to try and sort of improve on current organizations, current institutions, but I think there is a point in trying to imagine the unimaginable. We're facing a time where the governing states can address a refugee crisis, in my opinion at least. We are facing a time where we need to ask new questions of how we engage people, and we need to ask new questions on how we solve a conflict that's so complex and so old, 5 years old in Syria, that the states are unable to do, that the old humanitarian and social organizations aren't able to do, and that we can't really depend on unorganized initiatives based on the direct empathy feeling, because it doesn't necessarily transform into something making a social impact on a sort of in a longer perspective. So a lot of questions, and I don't have an answer to any of these dilemmas. What I can see is that there is really a sort of a movement towards wanting to combine your political point of view with your daily actions, and it would be very interesting to try and explore it, not from a political perspective, but from working as a social entrepreneur, instead of working as a social organization. And I'm really looking forward to see what's arising the next few months in these questions. So good ideas, good initiatives, reflections, dilemmas, discussion points would be much welcomed. I hope you can just sort of forgive me for not giving a full sort of happy-go-lucky speech on empathy, but anyways, thank you very much. Time's running. So.